The SABC is hurtling from crisis to crisis as its desperate financial situation stymies efforts to keep the lights on and its staff paid. Moreover, the long-awaited report into the editorial independence has yet to be released to the public. So just what is going on at Auckland Park? Sam Mkhokeli, SANEF's Media Freedom Committee Chair, joins me in the studio. William Bird from the Media Monitoring Africa will join us on Skype, and Duduetsang Makuse is from Save Our SABC, and she also joins me in the studios. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so very much for joining us. Duduetsang, let's start with you. The fact that the SABC is warning of day zero, why did we allow the situation to get to this point when all the indications were there that the money was going to run out and that there needs to be a cash injection?
I think the simplest answer is the lack of political will. As you've said, it has been over 6 months. In fact, the interim board during their tenure also indicated that there would need to be some form of either recapitalization alongside other measures that were taken, but nothing happened. Okay, let's take a listen to Ms. Van Biljon, Yolandi Van Biljon, who is the Chief Financial Officer at the SABC, speaking about the dire situation there.
I think day zero can happen tomorrow. It depends on if one of these big partners are unable to support us financially or must be forced to switch off our signal and distribution network, or where the maintenance situation impacts one of our critical infrastructures or facilities in one of the studios.
Well, that is, of course, a very real situation there. The Chief Financial Officer actually saying it can happen tomorrow, Sam.
It's a dire situation, but we shouldn't be surprised we are here. I mean, just now you were discussing
ESCOM.
So the state hasn't been good in managing our SOEs generally, and the SABC is one of them. We've had a painful past, the past 10, 15 years of this mismanagement of the place, and recently we had Claudio Mutsueneng blowing money and promising people grand things that were not sustainable. Now it threatens the public's right to know. And then there are jobs on the line. It's a situation really that is regrettable.
William, let me bring you in here. Is the government using the fact that it's withholding the money from the SABC as a way to exert editorial interference in the state, the public broadcaster? Because Minister Stella Ndabeni-Abrahams is meant to have had this problem in hand for a long time.
So look, I wouldn't want to say that they're using it directly to leverage editorial interference, but I do think that it's very clear, or at least the only reasonable and most clear and obvious reason why the SABC is not getting the guarantee is because there's a faction that doesn't want the SABC to get the guarantee because they're trying to use it to leverage and force those that are there trying to turn the ship around to resign. So it's the only kind of real mechanism that they currently have at their disposal, and it's clearly politically driven because they've known about the problem. They've been speaking to Treasury, they've been speaking to the DOC, and I mean, our last official public comment, as far as I'm aware, was that it was coming soon. You know, I mean, but when is soon? Soon could be tomorrow. Soon could be in 2 years' time.
Duduetsang, this idea that the government is playing games with the SABC, now we know that it's been reported in the newspapers that the SABC's money issues is tied to the entire SOE portfolio and whether or not Tito Mboweni is actually going to grant that money. But do you agree with William in the main that there are political underpinnings to the way in which this matter is being handled?
I think if you look at just the recent events over the last 6 months, if you look at the resignations and thereafter the delay in appointing to fill those vacancies, it's easy for one to conclude that perhaps there is some kind of horse trading and other political games that are playing at the background, and unfortunately it's happening at the cost of the institution and our ability to reach people who actually need it.
Sam, the political machinations obviously is tied to the political situation in the governing party, and just as I said in the case of ESCOM, they used to be tied to the issue around ideas ideas of how to do things. But we know now that that's long past. It's tied to patronage. It's tied to money issues. Who stands to benefit if the SABC, the screens are black? Is it MultiChoice? What is the motivation here?
Look, it's hard to see who would benefit. I mean, would all suffer. The SABC blackout is not too dissimilar to a blackout at Eskom. It affects the economy. There's a businessman out there whose decisions are based on the information they need. For society to function, it needs information. So it's an important one, and it would be short-sighted for anyone to celebrate, even if it was MultiChoice. MultiChoice, I mean, all the channels on MultiChoice would depend on the information ecosystem. Yes. The SABC is an incredible infrastructure. It reaches Kumbu, it reaches Tohiando in a way that the private media
just cannot.
Just cannot. Also, there's the power games. I mean, that's natural. At the same time, you're going to have the Department of Communications versus the Treasury. It's only natural that one would want to stamp their authority over this. But there's a number of ways to look at the SABC issue. There's the media freedom and the independence of the SABC, and then there's an economic debate that South Africans need to have about saving the SABC and for making it sustainable in the future, and not just the SABC, but other SOEs. So the economic models around the SABC. Hopefully, as we go through this, there's a way to have to force the conversation about what kind of SABC do we need in the future to avoid the kind of problems. We really have proof that the political setup and the infrastructure legally has not helped us to protect the SABC from political interference. Okay,
let me bring William back in, if I can get him back on Skype. William, who stands to benefit if our screens are black and day zero arrives at the SABC?
So I'm hoping that they are playing a very dangerous game of brinkmanship, because in the short to medium term, certainly, and even longer term, obviously, no one really stands to benefit by having the screens go black. I think what they are doing, as I said, is trying to pressure people and force them to try and resign and leave the situation. You know what I mean?
Who do they want? William, I just want to interrupt you quickly. Be specific. Who do you think are targets of the waiting game as it's being played? Do they want the board members to resign? Do they want senior managers to resign? Do they want journalists to resign? Who are we talking about?
So bear in mind that just a couple of weeks ago now, one of the members of the auditing team there was an attempted assassination on his life.
Yes.
So if you are in a desperate position where certain things are going to come out, you're wanting to get rid of the people that are there that are trying to put in place structures and systems to root out that kind of thing, which means you're targeting your most senior of management, you're targeting those members of the board who are also there to try and steer the ship and make sure that it's an independent public broadcaster. So there are a lot of people that have a lot of power, that have a lot to lose if SABC and the various things that have been going on there come to get brought to light. And certainly there's a lot of money that stands to be lost for those particular powerful people. So as I said, it's about trying to make sure that they can get rid of them, put in other people that are going to be less started perhaps in trying to root out a lot of these things.
Duduetsang, let's get specific. Who at the SABC currently stands to benefit if this money isn't available? We had an assassination attempt. So who is still there that is holding on to the old Saudi model and that is tied to that faction? Who are we talking about? Let's be specific.
I think that's the million-dollar question. Is we get a sense that even though we've changed the board, there have been concerns about some of the people who are appointed. I mean, the DA and some of the opposition parties clearly stated who they didn't want to see on the board. But we're confident that, it's a collective and they'll be able to do their jobs.
Yes.
At management level, again, we've changed the executives. One got fired for, unprocedural, for not following processes. So again, we could say that level potentially is stable. But there's a lot going on in newsrooms, in the different groups, that we actually don't know who's who. And it's really symptomatic of what's been happening in our broader political landscape in terms of factions.
But of course, Sam, that is a very dangerous situation. If you're dealing with a fight back at an institution like the SABC, and you can't even clearly identify the hidden hand, then obviously there's a major problem. And of course, compounding that, you have a communication minister who had a massive fight with the board, who was involved in an instance of actually censoring an SABC camera person. Is Stella Ndabeni the right person to be the communications minister?
Look, that horse has already bolted when they appointed her the first time.
No, but I mean, we can
Let
criticize whether people are the people. If we can say that Faith Mutambi shouldn't head up the committee of COCTA, surely we can ask whether Stella Ndabeni is or isn't the right minister for communications. Does she understand the portfolio?
That's right. I'm keen to answer the question. I have yet to see Stella Ndabeni articulating the policies around communication and the policy direction. She's
or the turnaround plan.
So I don't know what she's busy with. Maybe she's busy doing many things in the department. I mean, it's quite an interesting infrastructure. If you're going to crank up this economy, that department needs to be firing proper. The spectrum rollout is quite an important part, and the broadband rollout in terms of the spreading out, and deepening our democracy. We need people to have access to data at reasonable prices. So I'm yet to see the minister come out. So. The government has the prerogative to appoint the people they do. Then we continue to suffer as we are right now, because there is a leadership issue around the SABC issue. She hasn't even come out to actually tell us that this is what she's doing. There's a crisis.
Well, just for the record, for viewers who are watching, we did ask the minister to participate in this program. She said she was unfortunately not available. So just to make clear that we did reach out to the minister. Duduetsang, is Stella Ndabeni capable of understanding the complexities of the SABC, and more importantly, does she have the political clout and will to turn the place around?
I think she understands what needs to be done. She understands the landscape. She's been there. She's deputized for other ministers before.
Well, for Faith Mutambi.
Exactly.
That actually got the place into a massive crisis.
So I think she knows what's happening there. Has she been clear about what she wants to do? Does she have the will to do it? I'm not so sure. I mean, she tweets a lot about the 4IR army and getting us to the next stage of development, but we haven't really fixed this hemorrhaging situation that we have here. So how are you going to take a body that's in ICU into the future?
Absolutely. William, let me ask you, you've been involved in the SABC board for many, many decades. You've seen ministers come and go, boards come and go, executives come and go, CEOs come and go. Is Stella Ndabeni capable of turning the ship around at the SABC with the board that she has and with the team of executives that have been appointed?
So I think that if they reset their relationship, then it's a chance. I think that it's more up to the board and the structures. The minister, parliament, and ICASA all have a critical and fundamental role to play in doing this. And of course, the most important body of all, which is ordinary members of the public. They need to make sure that their voices are heard on these issues. But I think critically, we know that this also requires a rethinking fundamentally by the ANC in particular on how they understand and how they approach communication and what they're going to be doing around this, for the next 10, 15 years. Because unless there's clarity there, unless there's a coherent vision there, which currently doesn't seem to be the case, we're not going to be able to turn these things around, and we're going to be continually using the SABC as this kind of political football until there's nothing left of it, and that's going to be the real disaster, because the people that lose out at the end of the day will be the ordinary members of the public, and the poor in particular.
We saw the fight between the minister and ICASA a few months ago. In the State of the Nation address, the President speaks about the minister instructing ICASA to proceed on the spectrum matter. Do you think that that is going to actually happen, considering that the institution, the regulator, which was captured under Faith Mutambi, I mean, you had a criminal that was actually the chief executive of ICASA. Do you think that the minister and ICASA will be able to work together and see the spectrum process through?
Well, we have to hope that they do, and certainly we need to be watching. Everyone needs to keep a very close eye on that process. If ICASA seems to start getting things wrong, we need to be demanding and holding them accountable. The good news is that, of course, there are a lot of very big, powerful forces who are going to be watching that process with a lot of interest because, of course, they're hoping to gain spectrum.
Yes.
What we need to be asking is what's going to happen? Is what's going to happen to all the money that that comes from that spectrum? What we're hoping is that it doesn't just go back into the fiscus. It needs to go into something that can possibly support local content going further.
Now, I mean, the whole question of MultiChoice and its monopoly is a big issue. I mean, Franz Kruger says that there were two efforts to capture the SABC, one by the Guptas, the other by MultiChoice. The spectrum issue is obviously going to put MultiChoice in a situation where they're going to actually face real competition. They have in the past not been above, walking not a straight line in terms of lobbying and almost on the verge of trying bribing ministers to try and change policy. They certainly got Faith Mutambi to ignore cabinet decisions around this very issue. What do you think a big player such as MultiChoice is going to be doing, considering that they're also restructuring and retrenching quite a few people?
I think the obvious thing would be for them to try and get ahead of the curve. And I think that's what they've been doing over the past 3 years since they launched their own offerings, looking into IPTV possibilities. So unlike the other SOEs and unlike the SABC, they're not constrained by the politics of the land. They really just need to maneuver what's happening in there. I think when we do have, spectrum available, the SABC still has to go and make sure that it has the capacity to produce digital content, to play in that space. They're going to have to look at whether or not their units are set up from a business model perspective for that space, because we know that it's very hard to make money from digital platforms. So I think they're already 100 meters into the race, and we're going to be playing catch up again as public service media and as local content producers.
Now, if you look at the fact that local content is important, both in terms of job creation, but also just in terms of being able to tell the South African story. I mean, culturally, we need to promote things like social cohesion. And we're not talking about Cloudy's, ridiculous idea of constantly playing the same people, even though DJs are being paid under the counter to promote certain individuals and so on. But the imperative to develop programming that actually gives people an understanding of what this country is about, the issues of social cohesion, is very, very important. If we don't get the spectrum thing right, Sam, what are the consequences for the media industry and particularly, the kind of industries that feed off that, your local producers and so on?
Look, we'll really be frustrating our dreams of prosperity. You were talking earlier about economic prosperity. Spectrum is so important in terms of the new administration's promise to develop, to boost the economy. Quite frankly, it's one of the few areas, the low-hanging fruit around the economic evolution of the new administration. Would actually be frustrating competition. We're not going to have new ways of doing things coming through innovation. The SABC is in no position to do any of these things right now because of the financial situation. But the industry generally needs that. But most importantly is the common guy's ability to access information at a very reasonable price. I mean, people need spectrum. People need to access things like finding jobs, communicating. I mean, our data costs are quite high.
Yeah. Now, the president spoke about that, and he said that these things are all going to be addressed. Unfortunately, again, no time frames were put to it. Stella Ndabeni's buzzword is the fourth industrial revolution. She consistently, speak about it. You can't even think about the fourth industrial revolution if data costs, doesn't come down. The lack of time frame, surely a missed opportunity on the part of the president.
Absolutely, especially because there are parallel processes that have to happen here. It's not just about releasing the spectrum. It's also about making sure that you have plans in place to shift the SOEs that are currently analog. So in our sector, you'd be looking at the SABC. But then it's also about bringing together the industry and making sure that they have spaces on there. What's going to happen to community media? What's going to happen to the guys who are already trying to launch their own video and service demands? There's entrepreneurs out there with business plans and they're ready. What's going to happen to those guys?
Yep.
Then there's the ICT sector and the telecoms guys who have to now look for how to make broadband and Wi-Fi accessible in remote areas.
But this is exactly the issue. I mean, this is what Faith Mutambi frustrated. And we know now that she frustrated it on the instructions of one big player that stands to lose if we actually, mess with the monopoly that they have. Sam, the question of political interference in the SABC is a huge issue. We have a situation where there's supposed to be a report that is supposed to be presented to the public around whether there was political interference or not. We saw the parliamentary process. Where is that report? In SANEF, for example, have you been told by members of the SABC where things are at when that report is going to be released?
Look, we are excited about the prospect of seeing the report. We had a council meeting yesterday where we had members of SANEF who come from the SABC who are telling us about some promising conversations within the SABC about changing the various models, finance, the business side, media, news side of things. So we have heard that the report will be coming through very soon. We don't know whether they will have found the smoking gun about political interference, but so often investigators are hamstrung by
but let's speak about the smoking gun thing, because I've heard that the reason why Joe Tolwe is not releasing the report is because he says there is no smoking gun. How could there be no smoking gun if we heard people like Thandeka Qubule, if we heard Vuyo Mvoko say in Parliament under oath that people were instructed by Hlaudi Motsoeneng to do A, B and C? I mean, what more of a smoking gun do you actually need? People were given death threats. I mean, yesterday, for example, and please confirm for me, I'm speaking under correction, I understood that Sophie Mokoena from the SABC apologized to her colleague from the SABC 8, Thandeka Qubule. Did that happen, and what was the reason for the apology?
Look, I mean, SANEF is a very transparent organization. We had a council meeting. It came out in the deliberations that Thandeka raised a couple of issues about the SABC and the politics and what would be normal in any work environment. And Sophie came out to apologize for retweeting a news report that said people in the SABC 8 were paid by Bosasa, something that was an outright a lie, but we had that conversation.
So the reason for Sophie Mokoena, who is quite a key figure in the newsroom leadership at the SABC, she apologized to another senior person at the SABC, the economics editor, for retweeting a tweet that suggested falsely, I might add, and incorrectly, that they were paid by Bosasa. Now, what prompted that, Sam, in the SANEF meeting? Was she asked specifically to do that? Was that a requirement that you put on her? Or was it as a consequence of the discussion around what the problems are at the SABC?
I mean, the colleagues at the SABC were amazing, really, in how they handled the matter within the SABC itself. They were merely sharing and updating us on the developments from within the SABC. I mean, as SANEF, we have a stake in the matter because we helped the SABC 8, and they were very vulnerable at the time. And then we were accused of helping them get money through Bosasa. So we were disappointed with the Sunday Times for really peddling a lie. So it was about looking back at what had happened about the issue. But it was really impressive of Thandeka and Thandeka Qubule, Sophie Mokoena to have handled the matter in the way they were merely taking us through what had already happened.
Duduetsang, SANEF is big on apologies, right? So there we have an apology from Sophie and the matter sorted. The minister put her hand in front of a camera, she apologized, SANEF was happy with that. Does that take us to true media independence? And does that mean that when people apologize, then they don't go to prison, they don't actually have to account? Are apologies enough?
I think apologies are enough to a degree, but for the most part, if you look at what has happened at the SABC, there's a lot more accountability that needs to happen. There's just too much impunity. I was just reading the other day that the SIU investigations and the civil litigation around that is going to cost them 366 million. And that's on top of all the losses that we've been accounting for since 2016. And we haven't even recovered much of that money. So, I mean, when you look at something like that, the damage is so extensive that a mere apology is just not going to suffice.
A mere apology is simply not going to suffice. We need real action if the SABC is going to be sorted out. After the break, we take a look through the weekend newspapers to see what stories are making the front pages. Don't go away.